Good evening, everyone. I think I know most of you, but let me introduce myself. I'm Suzanne Morse-Mumma. I'm the Chair of Urban and Environmental Planning. It is my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Lauren Alexander Augustine. Am I saying that correctly? Or Augustine? Augustine, as in St. Augustine, as the 2024 Plavnik Innovations in Practice Lecturer. Lauren is Executive Director for the Gulf Coast Research Program at the National Academy of Sciences. She has a long tenure at the National Academies, beginning in 2002. She has held a number of roles during that time, including Director of the Resilient America Program, Country Director for the African Science Academy Development Initiative, and was a Study Director for the Water Science and Technology Board. In addition to all of that, she sits on international boards and councils. To say the least, she's busy, very busy. Lauren earned her BS in Applied Mathematics and Systems Engineering and her Master's in Urban and Environmental Planning at UVA, and I'm proud to say, as is Heidi, she was president of the Student Planning Association. So that's all the credential you really need to know. She went on to get a PhD in combined physical hydrology, geomorphology, and ecology from Harvard University. Please join me in welcoming this double who, Lauren Alexander Augustine, why do I have trouble? St. Augustine, and her lovely family who joined us from Maryland. So welcome, Lauren.
Thank you.
I think St. Augustine works fine.
It does. It works perfect. Well, hi, everyone. Hi. I thank you so much, Suzanne, and Tim Beatley for inviting me here. It's really nice to be back, and it's a great honor because I really never thought I'd be invited back, so thank you for that. So, everyone here a planner? Anyone? Okay, good. I'm going to go through the slides, and then we can leave some time for questions, okay? All right, so first let me say thank you. Thank you. It's really wonderful to be here, and I appreciate the honor to be here. I'm going to talk about 4 things here during this little bit of time. First, I'm just going to talk about when you guys will get this when you get out of school and you start really working in the real world. You've got to start with the question why. Like, why are we doing this? What problem are we trying to solve? And so I want to set the context for why. And I'm going to talk about this forgotten coast at the bottom of this country, okay? Then, a lot of people here dealing with climate change issues, right? Dynamic landscapes, nothing is static. I'm going to talk a lot about how this landscape down in the Gulf is highly dynamic. And what does that mean for something so valuable? Then I'm going to talk about sometimes complex answers. Questions have complex answers. And then we're going to talk about your role, what you guys can do in this space. Okay, so the Gulf Coast is kind of like the forgotten coast of the United States. Yet the Department of Justice declares it a national priority. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So everyone knows this guy, right? We all go to Thomas Jefferson's University. And he said he wanted to be remembered for 3 things. He put him on his epitaph. He wanted to be known as the author of the Declaration of Independence, of the state of Virginia religious rights, religious freedom, and father of this university. I think of him most as this, and I always wonder why he didn't put that he also purchased Louisiana Purchase. He arranged this, as we all know, it's a fire sale, right, from the French. French were fighting England. They were distracted. He's like, you know what I want? He didn't want Montana. He didn't want Nebraska. He wanted the port. He wanted this. That's what he wanted. He wanted this river, and he wanted the mouth to it. That was it. He was like, whatever else you give me is fine, but I want the port of New Orleans. And that's what he bought, and we got the rest, we got the drainage to go with it. Fast forward to now, a graduate of his university who, by the way, he never would have admitted, but that's a different story for a different time, is now in charge of some $800 million in endowment funds to protect this part of the Louisiana Purchase, okay? And it is now, like he thought it would be, an economic priority. The real reason he wanted the Louisiana Purchase was actually national security, because the Brits were fighting the French. He's like, if we don't own that river, the Brits are going to come up that river, and we're going to be at war again with the British on this soil. And he didn't want that, so he wanted it. But the second reason is he wanted the port. And we take the first reason for granted at this point, right? We're like, we don't think about anyone coming up that river because no one's coming up that river. This one we don't take for granted. This is a very active coast, and it's a working coast, and it contributes trillions of dollars to our GDP, our U.S. Gross national product every year, gross domestic product every year. Shipping, that port, I'm going to talk about that port of Louisiana, all that steel and grain coming down, $1.5 trillion. Food, seafood, $680 billion. Fuel, we talk about oil and gas, and of course fun. If anyone's been to Mardi Gras, which is tomorrow, it is fun, right? So let's talk about shipping. This is why he really wanted to buy this, and we're talking about all of that steel and grain coming down that river and out of the mouth of the Mississippi. New Orleans, that southern Louisiana suite of ports, is about $400 billion a year, which used to be the driver, right? Until Houston came along a few years ago and knocked it out of the water with $908 billion. So you have these things. You have Port of Mobile, which actually is the biggest in terms of weight, because you can take a train out of Mobile onto a boat to take it to Mexico. So Mobile has its niche, and I'm going to talk about Port Fourchon, which is at the bottom of Louisiana, which is like a valve for all of the offshore energy material. Anything that goes out in the offshore for energy has to go through Port Fourchon, and that controls about 25% of all of the U.S. Oil and gas. That one little port that no one's ever heard of, Port Fourchon. So shipping, huge. Food, huge. 40% of the seafood that we eat in the United States comes out of the Gulf of Mexico. Okay? $680 billion, $400 billion is for shrimp alone. So eat Gulf shrimp. You should eat it anyway. Don't eat the imported stuff. But tons of this comes out of the Gulf every year. Big money. And then there's oil and gas. So this is the traditional oil and gas. This is natural gas. This is crude. And the Gulf region dominates 68% of U.S. petroleum products, right? This is also things like plastics. The ethylene needed to make plastics, 70% comes out of the Gulf, out of Texas. So this is big. Oil and gas and all the petrochemicals is big. And when I say it's big, this is what it looks like, right? And so here we have these black lines. These are pipelines. Anyone care to guess how many miles of pipelines are in the Gulf of Mexico? Anyone want to guess? Lots. 30,000 miles of pipelines are in the Gulf of Mexico. 30,000 miles. It's like 10 times around the Earth at the widest point or something like that. And then each of these red things are rigs or platforms. And here, the big oil spill took up that little bit amount of space. That was a huge oil spill. Deepwater Horizon, 2010, BP oil spill, right there. And look how much is exposed. This is what in our program we call a latent risk. Because of these 30,000 miles of pipeline, 20,000 are abandoned or orphaned, and 10,000 of those 20,000, the U.S. government said, we can't deal with it. We waive all regulation on them. We have no idea what's in those pipelines. So this is what it looks like. This is what we're talking about. This is a big money. Liquid natural gas. This is a teeny tiny little baby in the hydrocarbon economy. Only 35 billion right now. But look at what's coming in the Gulf of Mexico. 17 have been approved by FERC. 15 of them are in the Gulf of Mexico. This is coming because the United States has a lot of oil and gas. We're moving towards renewables. Our demand's going down, but the rest of the world, we are exporting. So this exportation economy out of the Gulf of Mexico has a steep climb like this. This is part of the energy transition as we go to renewables and we go to cleaner fuel options and we go to carbon zero. The rest of the world is buying our gas, and it's coming out of the Gulf of Mexico. But it's a fun place. Anyone here like to go fishing? Yes, some. Anyone like to go bird watching? Right, some others, right? So when you go down to this part of the country, you pay a permit fee to go do those things. And that contributes $20 billion. Tomorrow is Mardi Gras in New Orleans. And these 2 weeks leading up to tomorrow, in New Orleans alone, contributes $1 billion to the U.S. GDP. So fun is a big part of this economy. They say, bon temps roule, let the good times roll. That's what they say tomorrow, and this is, of course, from Mardi Gras. But here's the deal, and you guys know this because you're planners and you're planning for a dynamic world, that nothing stays the same. And so we're talking about a dynamic landscape. So now we are transitioning into part 2. Everything changes. We're talking about sea level rise. We're talking about coastal land loss. In the course of this lecture alone, Louisiana is going to lose about a football field and a half into the Gulf of Mexico. And I'm going to talk about that in a second. All these environmental changes that come from climate change and some that don't come from climate change, but they are happening, subsidence, all these things, that coastal zone where that fresh water comes in from the Mississippi and it meets that warm, salty water from the Gulf, creates all these conditions, and that's changing very, very rapidly. We're also going through an energy transition. We're going to renewables, we're moving away from hydrocarbons, but what does that mean for the economy? What does that mean for the worker? What does it mean for the worker who, with a high school degree, an 18-year-old with a high school degree, can get a job on a rig and make $120,000? What happens when that economy goes away, right? You guys are all planners. There is no community resilience if there's no community economy. So what do we do with those people? And of course, there's changing communities. People are living on the edge. They're living in risk. They're moving around. Houston's about to eclipse Chicago as the 3rd biggest city in the country. And New Orleans is losing hundreds of thousands of population every year. Or not every year, but since Katrina has lost 300,000 people. So people are on the move, and they're not moving like everyone's not leaving. They're just moving around, and it's hard to keep track. So this is the landscape in which I work. It's the landscape in which we all live, though. So the World Economic Forum every year puts out a global risk report. Anyone read it? Anyone heard of it? If you haven't, it's a really great document, and I recommend you look into it because it kind of outlines what people suspect might be coming. And so here, for the next 2 years, misinformation and disinformation, it's an election year. Half of the globe is going to vote in 2024. Half of the globe is going to vote. And this is seen as the top risk. That's not the point of this talk, but keep an eye on that. Extreme weather is number 2, and social polarization's the 3rd. But in 10 years from now, those top 4 are all climate related. So we're looking across the world, across the globe, we're looking at extreme weather, earth systems, biodiversity loss, and natural resource shortages. All of these things, by the way, fit in the Gulf of Mexico. All these things, these are risks to the Gulf too. And the thing is, it's not 10 years away, it's not 2 years away, those things are happening right now. This is the bottom of the Mississippi River, right? It's called the bird's foot because it looks like a bird, right? Any hydrologists in the room? Any coastal people learning about water? All right, well, right, then you guys know what happens at the bottom of a river is that they start to backstep, right? Deltas sink. And that's what's kind of happening here. But notice here, here's the land in 1937, and 60 years later, that's how much land is left. And you see it on the maps. But I want to tell you, I've been working down there for 5 years, and these changes are happening in real time. So land transitions from land, right? You see houses here on land, to marsh, to open water. This house was built in 1990. okay? And it was built, this was a carport, you drove your car up and you parked. This was like a little church, and there was like 3 or 4 of these houses. But I was up there on a boat, and this is what it looks like. So when you see this map and maps like it, this is what it actually looks like. These are real people's houses. Someone built this house and lived there. Well, this might have been a church. But it's not livable anymore. So while it's getting wetter at the bottom, what's happening on the Mississippi? Anyone follow what happened on the Mississippi last year? It started to go dry. Anyone here who's ever studied the Mississippi knows that the whole thing was built and engineered for what? Floods, right? Big flood in 1927. They changed the whole system. They said it can't flood again. You got to get water into New Orleans. Rebuilt the whole system. Spillways, we can move water when the Mississippi floods. It is not built to be dry. There is no engineering on that river that can deal with a low freshwater flow. And so what's happening is that it is constricting the shipping. They said, okay, we're going to still dredge because the Army Corps of Engineers is going to dredge. They're going to keep that channel open. But now only 1 ship can go through, not 2. And that $400 billion we talked about is at risk. But the other thing that's happening at the bottom is that without that fresh water coming in, the salty warm water's coming up. And New Orleans is now getting salt water in their freshwater systems. This is called saline intrusion, and this is very real risk in the lower part of Louisiana right now. So sometimes these things come together, right? You got the people, you got the oil, you got the environment, and they can come together in ways that we just don't want to see. Earlier I mentioned Port Fourchon, and I said it was at the end of the Louisiana coastline, right? It's a place where this little port makes sure all the material, anything, ambulances, helicopters, people, food, if they need to go out to the offshore, they got to go through this port. This road, anyone here from Louisiana? My husband's, I see halfway over there. Okay, this is Louisiana Route 1, and it goes to the very bottom of the state. And this is north, and you travel south on it, and you take this hard turn to the left, and there is Port Fourchon. Okay? Does it look like a bridge to anyone here? This road was built at grade. Okay? And then they had to elevate it over the last 2 years to bring it above grade because the land subsided beneath it. Now the problem is that when this road floods, and it floods all the time, you can't get to Port Fourchon, which supplies almost 20% of the nation's oil and gas at any one time. This is this national priority at risk. And there's another risk. Hurricane Ida came in 2021. Hurricane Ida came in, leveled Port Fourchon, and leveled this lower part, Grand Isle of Louisiana. And then you guys remember what it did? It went to New York and Philadelphia and killed a whole bunch of people up there. No one expected that from a Louisiana hurricane to kill people in New York 5 days later. We're in a new era, and this is kind of what it looks like. And so then during Ida, that is Louisiana 1, impassable in most places. Now it turns out that the guys, and they are all guys, who work at the port, they sheltered in place because they knew this storm was coming, and they took the hit, and they stayed there to keep the port open because they couldn't afford to have it closed. That's what we're dealing with down there. And so let's talk about the people, right? So you have people who work there, you have people who live there, and even on a blue sky day, these people aren't doing that well. This is not supposed to be an eye test. Just know that the darker the blue, the worse off the people are, right? And so for all these social determinants of health, environmental, income, poverty, food insecurity, we're just not doing well in the Gulf. This is not a blue sky day, right? And when the sky is not blue, look at this. It's like a bullseye on these 5 states. And, all right, this is a little bit of a cheat because this includes Katrina, but New Orleans alone counted for 11% of the losses in this time period. Do you know how big New Orleans is? It's like 700,000 people. And they accounted for hundreds of billions of dollars of losses over this period. So this is what we're also dealing with. And when you put it all together, the oil, the people, the storms, the sea level rise, coastal subsidence, you get this really scary brew coming in this dynamic landscape. I like this map, I like this image because I just think it sums it all up. It looks like there's a target right here somewhere between East Texas and Mobile, Alabama, because this is the biggest risks in the country due to sea level rise, right? Due to sea level rise. Okay, so let's start to now solve the problems, right? Those are the problems before us. So what are we going to do about it? And sometimes these complex problems layered with people, money, energy, economy, health, environment, they need planning solutions. A very famous person once said, for every complex problem, there's an answer that is clear and simple and wrong. Okay? So sometimes these problems require integrated, complicated solutions. And this is what I'm going to talk about for the remainder of my time here. How do we build these integrated solutions? Right? How do we do that? And you guys are in planning, and you guys are here studying environmental and urban planning, and you guys understand that these things come together, right? So the first things that I would posit everyone needs is a strong foundation and evidence base. You can't get a good solution if you don't know what you're talking about, and you can't get a good solution if your facts are wrong. It's just not going to work. So you've got to start with that. Next thing is, anyone here social, consider themselves social people? Yeah, bring your friends because you need as many people as possible. This is not a one-man show. This isn't the time for heroics. You need a team. You need a good team. Call your friends. And then you also need end users. And this is something that we're learning in the Gulf Research Program because scientists and the academia, we often have a solution that we want to push to people. Because we know, because we went to the best schools and we're smart and we've been studying this and we know. And so we want to push the solution. But you really need someone to pull. You need that end user to say, we want to pull, we need an answer, we need some help. And without that last one, no one's going to use what we're putting out there. So these are some of the building blocks I just want to talk about. And this is actually where I work comes in. And I work at the National Academy of Sciences. And we answer scientific questions that have a policy application. And I'm going to embarrass Tim Beatley here, because when I came here for my master's, Tim was doing all this cool coastal planning stuff. And I was like, I want to do that. I want to do policy stuff with a science background. That's actually how I started on this path. So thank you, Tim. But that's what we do here. And we provide advice from an evidence base. The most famous example of the National Academies being used was during the Civil War, when Abraham Lincoln was trying to get a compass to work on a lead hull ship. And the lead in the ship was messing with the magnet in the compass. And he couldn't get it to work. And they were coming for the port of Wilmington. And he turned to some people in like the Navy and stuff like that, and he said, how do I get this to work? And in that request, and in the answer that was given to him, the National Academy of Sciences was born in 1863. In academia, and among other smart people, we like to admire a problem. There's no problem that we cannot admire forever. We can do lots of studies, we can turn it inside out, we can say, what about this? But in the end, it's what do we do? All right, fine, now what do we do? So I work in a part of the academy called the Gulf Research Program, and it's the part of the academy that got a lot of money from the BP oil spill. So BP spilled all that oil. The Department of Justice said, ma'am, this is a really important part of our country. They taxed BP some $60 billion, and they gave us $500 million in 2013 to kind of do the community service part of it. And we have three things to do with this money. We got to enhance offshore energy safety. We can't have another Macondo spill. We need to enhance environmental protection. we need to protect the environment that is so important to the economy of this country through fin fish, shellfish, oil and gas, biodiversity, and we need to help the people. The people have to be healthy and resilient. Those are the three things. These are not easy things. These are what we call complex problems. I have 20 years left and a little under $800 million in assets because the stock market was good in the first 10 years. So we're trying to get from integrated problems, people working in oil and gas that's causing climate change, that's putting them at risk, like these are integrated problems, right, to integrated solutions. And we're doing that trying integrated approaches like this. So I get to give away money. And I give away a lot. I have to give it all away, right? It's a great job. I get to give away money on things that I think are important. And so this is something I thought was important. I went to a design studio because I remember being here and up at the GSD, we got these impossible questions, and we had to draw on science and engineering and economy and policy and law to get answers. And so I put out a call, and I just like this headline because it just cuts to the chase. This is the integrated solutions we're looking for. So I'm going to give you 3 examples of this. One is the design studio course. Second one is our work around Gulf sea level variation and rise. And the third one is around the Mississippi River Delta. So does anyone recognize this guy? That's Iñaki Alde, right? And now he's at Tulane. And it was with Iñaki that we cooked this up. Because I went to him, I was like, I think there's something here for a design studio course. And he said, I think you're right. Of course he said that. But it's great because he's one of the first groups here. So Tulane, they took the call went out that they had to do a subset of 2 or more of the oil, the environment, and the community resilience. And Tulane took the oil side and the environmental side. And I wanted just to point out what the call was: energy safety, Gulf coastlines, healthy, resilient communities. But I really wanted to call attention here. When Tulane put their program together, they pulled planners, Rich Campanella, he's a big name. They pulled finance and economy, Jesse Keenan. They pulled in EHAB, who's like one of the best physical hydrology modelers in the country, and they put in coastal geology. So they brought in this tiger team and said, we want to tackle this head on. And this is the kind of integrated solution we're looking for. And this is, again, not an eye test, but you can see they took the post-petrochemical transition across, like from the Houston Ship Channel all the way to Lafayette, Louisiana, and came up with all these solutions of how to remediate. It was just really beautiful. So a lovely integrated solution. Sea level rise, right? Now this sea level rise depends on these global climate models, right? But they're really made for like the Pacific and the Atlantic, these huge oceans. And the Gulf of Mexico is a tiny little ocean. It's like a mini ocean at the bottom. And it's like, think about how much it takes to fill up your bathtub versus your sink, right? So you get a lot more variation in your sink because it's smaller. It's the same with the Gulf of Mexico. So the global climate models don't really help the Gulf understand how sea level rise is going to affect it. So this is another one. Now, this was not a planning one. This is not a design studio course, but it was physical sea level rise and hydrologists working with these models here. And they did have some landscape architects here to get some pathways and what it would look like. And then they had an end user, the state of Louisiana, their coastal master plan. And so they were taking all of these models, working with the coastal planners in Louisiana to understand this. They were asking the right questions about which communities do we need to understand? Which communities are going to get hit the hardest? What do we do? What are the next steps? Now these guys, I know them, they are brilliant. You don't want them answering this question because they don't know anything about the people affected by this plan. But because they were working with the Water Institute, because they were working with Sea Grant, and because this was effectively their client, they got that in. And so the sea level rise has meaning in Louisiana. And then finally, the Mississippi River Delta. And I said earlier that if you're going to get an integrated solution, you better have your friends handy. 14 friends all came together. From Jackson State to Grambling to LSU and Tulane. Water Institute's an NGO. Even here in VIMS, even here in Virginia, right? They brought the best of the best who understand this system, which is more than complicated, to answer these 4 questions. Now, let me just tell you that when you bring a coastal ecologist and a physical hydrologist together, the only thing they want to do is model how the delta is going to sink. But I told them, because I'm a physical hydrologist too, I said, I don't need to pay you guys $25 million to tell me what's going to happen to the delta. That delta is going to sink. What I need to know is so what? What happens when it sinks? How does it sink? East to west, south to north, or west to east? Because it matters, because people live there. But then I said, what happens to all that manipulation on the Mississippi from the Army Corps? All those sediment diversions, all those new wetlands that they're building. How does that play into what's happening in the delta? Because there's only so much sediment. It's the same sediment, whether they move it here or move it there. So what does it do to the delta? Does it make it sink faster? Does it make the saline intrusion accelerate? We don't know. So this management evaluation, they had to work with the Corps of Engineers. Everyone either loves working with the Corps or they hate working with the Corps. There's no one who is neutral on the Corps, but they have to work with the Corps because the Corps has redesigned the entire lower river. So all this modeling doesn't mean anything without the Corps of Engineers. So number 2, management evaluation. But then what about the people? How do we build this pipeline? If we're going to invest this much money in this problem, which affects everybody, right? This is where all the money's made. Oils, fish, recreation, it's all made in this delta. How do we diversify the people who are going to be working on this? Because the people who are the leads on this, they're like old white men. But Louisiana is not an old white man place. It is extremely diverse. So I was like, I need the up-and-comers to look like the state. And I made them do that. And they did a great job with that. And then also, what does it mean for the people? Can they live there? How fast do they have to move? Do they have to retrofit their houses? If so, are they doing it for water, which would be elevation, or wind and a hurricane, where elevation works against you? What are you going to design for? How do you get that socioeconomic resilience? So they're looking for what's likely to happen and when, how do we keep navigation, what are the broader consequences, and how can we use this kind of science, engineering, modeling to get at this integrated solution. This is the kind of real world work that we do, that we fund, and that I like a lot. Okay, so we get to do kind of what we want. Someone asked me, Heidi, are you here? Is Heidi here? Heidi asked me earlier today, she's like, what's the favorite part of your job? I was like, I kind of have a lot of autonomy. So I get to try science in new and different ways so that we can get new and different results, because what we've been doing in the Gulf of Mexico, it isn't working, and it's not going to work for the conditions to come. I have a lot of money, but I don't have enough money, and I have a lot of time, but I don't have enough time. And so we have to use our influence with the people in the region. This goes right back to get a lot of friends, make them like you, and bring them together. Because I'm not living in Louisiana, but the people who live there have to have a stake in this. We convene, we connect, we can do all that. That's always good, and we do that really well. And primarily, though, we want to use this time and these assets to leave this place better than we found it. That's what we're doing here in the GRP. So none of this is easy, and this is where it comes to you guys, because we're all really counting on you. We're looking for designing solutions for resilience and other complex problems, and this is how I think you guys should do it. You got to get a team, make as many friends as you can. So if you guys are here in the A school, go to the E school, go to the college, go to McIntyre. Get your people, because you can't do this without them. Be creative and open-minded to new solutions, because what we've been doing is probably not going to work, so we need new ideas. And you got to ask the really hard questions. It's not like, oh, what could happen, right? Or it's not what will. I mean, it's like, what happens to this place, these people, if such and such happens? They're hard questions, and you got to ask smart questions. You got to ask the right questions, and that is hard. It's easier said than done. And then you have to communicate. You got to tell your story. You got to get out there what you've learned. And what you learned may not be right all the time, but it's a starting point, and people can then build on that. So you got to tell your story. You got to be able to communicate well. And then most of all, you just got to start. It's got to start. You can study it to death, but you got to start. And you can learn as you go. These are idiosyncratic things, right? You can't repeat the Gulf of Mexico. You can't repeat the Chesapeake Bay. They're idiosyncratic. So you might as well just start. So get your evidence base together. You guys know what this looks like. This is what your studios look like. Get your people together. You got to bring people who know things you don't know. You can bring your friends who know what you know, but then you're not really expanding the solution set. So you got to bring people who know what you don't know. And you got to build partnerships, and that includes trust. And you got to tell your story any way you can. You know, I mean, if you work at a big famous place, yeah, you can get on NPR. But if you don't, you can get on YouTube. Tell your story. Someone wants to hear it. They won't be easy. But I'm telling you, you guys are getting the best preparation for this work. And I know this because I was prepared here by the same people who are teaching you, and I'm doing this work. So you guys are getting the right skill set. You're learning how to work in teams, right? You're learning how to think in synthetic ways. Yes? No nodding here? Yeah, okay. You learn to ask the right questions when you have a studio. What's the program? What are we trying to solve here, right? And most of all, you got what it takes to work all night long. Because I know everyone here pulls all-nighters, because that's the nature of this beast. But that's the nature of the beast. Like, you just got to do the work until it's done, and you might lose some sleep along the way. You can catch up on your sleep, but you guys have what it takes to know that because it's 5 o'clock, it doesn't mean you're done. And that's really important here. So I guess I will close by saying maybe TJ was onto something to list UVA as one of his greatest life accomplishments. Because maybe he knew that his graduates would make the world a better place by matching its wicked problems with wicked smart solutions, right? And maybe he knew that his graduates would move mountains. And so in a nod to my kids, one of our favorite quotes in our house, you guys are going to move mountains. Your mountain is waiting, so get on your way. And with that, I will say thank you.